Okay guys, we just wanted to say hi and welcome. We're going to do a video series for you guys for your next series of lessons for AgriScience. So if you guys were going to be here at school and it was going to be normal after we get done with welding, we would do a garden and talk about like planting a garden. We can't think of any better unit that's more practical right now than a unit on gardening. So we're going to have a series of lessons for the upcoming weeks that you guys have out, which would be weeks 4, 5, and 6 about gardening. So we're going to have a series of videos on here where Mr. Williams and I talk to you about gardening and things to do to grow a successful garden. So today the topic of this video is going to be about site selection and soil testing. So I'm going to cover a portion of the video and then Mr. Williams is going to cover a portion of the video, and we're actually going to go outside today and take a soil sample so that when you guys get ready to plant your gardens, some of you guys may have already broke the ground for your gardens, you guys will know the steps that you can do to have a more successful garden. And please share other tips that you all have when you plant your garden, because everyone does a little bit different and everyone has their own special tip. And I know that you guys come from families where a lot of you guys have really good successful gardens, and so we want to share some of that information. So number one, what we want to talk about are the tools that are good for doing a soil sample. So what a soil sample is you will collect a sample of the soil from the site that you're going to plan to plant your garden in, and you can send that off to the Taylor County Extension Office or an extension office that's nearest you. Some of you guys, that might be Columbia or Adair County or Greene County. And with that soil sample, it'll get sent to a lab and you'll get a soil analysis. And that soil analysis, it'll tell you pH, it'll tell you micronutrients, and it'll tell you macronutrients. Macronutrients are really big nutrients. These are the big guys. These are important. So macronutrients would be things like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. And so these are big ones. Micronutrients are the smaller ones, so they're ones that maybe aren't as important to soil health and plant health, but that are essential for a good and successful garden. Those would be things like zinc and copper and manganese, some of those other elements that you guys hear of. So once you get that soil analysis back, then they will make recommendations for you about amendments that you can make to your garden. And an amendment is fertilizer. So we'll have another video later on where we talk about fertilizers and how to apply fertilizers and even compost your garden. So let's start off by looking at some tools, and then Mr. Williams is going to talk to you about garden site selection and then actually how to take that sample once you get outside. So let's look at some of these tools that we've got. And anytime that you want to use some of these tools, you can borrow these from us. So this long tool that you see right here, this is a soil probe. It's got a little window that you can see the soil in. Mr. Williams is going to talk to you more about that, but when you do a soil sample selection, you want to try to take a sample from about 6 inches deep. The deeper that you can get that sample, the better. A lot of homes don't have a soil probe. You guys are benefited because you can borrow this one from us. But if you have a spade at home, you can also take a soil sample with a spade. It's just a little bit more difficult, requires you to get down on your knees, but this soil spade can also be used. This is a pH wide range indicator. You through your soil samples will get a pH reading on your soil, but obviously understand that pH can change a little bit over time, and so that's important. Whenever you get done with your soil sample, this is the bag that your sample will go into. You have to fill this bag to the fill line, and you put your name, and you can identify the field that you're sending that to. Everything else that's at the bottom, the extension office fills out. But this will go to the University of Kentucky, to their Division of Regulatory Services, and they will run a soil analysis on this. This can be done for any crop, not just a garden. So this can be done in alfalfa fields. This can be done in a garden. This can be done in your yard just to see what's best amendments for your yard. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Williams.
Okay, guys, there's a lot of things that give a lot of people problems, I guess, when they get ready to select a garden site. It may be too wet, could be too dry, could be that the soil's been compacted. And some of you all in here, may not even have a place to put a garden, and you may want to try like a patio garden, or, for example, what's known as a bucket garden, where you can actually take a 5-gallon bucket, or you can take a sack of soil and you can plant some things like beans, potatoes, or for that matter, even tomatoes and squash, cucumbers, things like that. So we're going to address that as well. So what I'm going to do is we're going to come up here and I'm going to show you a site. It's a traditional type site for gardens in Kentucky. So when you kind of look, right here's the board, Miss Wayne's board. And when you kind of look at that board, you're going to notice a couple of things about that. Typically, they are square in position. Also, you're going to notice on that thing is when you get ready to go and take your soil samples, where do you take it? How do you take it? That type thing. So when you look at the boards, the first thing we're going to look at is on a square type circle. We want to come in from the corner. We're going to take a sample here, like Miss Wayne said, 6 to 8 inches. That soil probe, if you get that from us, can go down as far as 12 inches in the soil. So we try to get around that 6 to 8 inch mark. After that, we come over to the other corner, then come to the bottom, and then over back to the other side of those corners. And when you notice on that thing, one of the things you're going to notice then is we're going to come and take samples in the middle, and then we're going to take them then again from the side. We take those samples and then we place them in the bag that Miss Wayne showed you just a few minutes ago, and then we take that and take that to our extension agent. In this case, in Taylor County, it's going to be Pat Hardesty, and he'll go and he'll send that thing off, and then when they come back with results, you can kind of look at what some of the things you might need to make your garden a little bit better.
Okay, so we're going to head right outside, and so we're going to show you actually how to use the soil probe in the ground. Okay, guys, we are outside here at the high school. You guys can see how close that we are to the greenhouse. One of the things that you need to consider for a garden site is your site selection. So there's a few things that you can consider when you think about where that you want to plant your garden. You should first think about sun exposure. How much sun is this site going to get? When these trees that are right here are in full leaf and they've got leaves on them, this site will have a little bit of shade cover. But selecting a site that has full sun cover is good for certain crops. You just got to consider the crops that you're going to plant. But for what Mr. Williams and I would like to have here at the school, this is a great site for us, because you also want to consider things like access to resources. If it were to get too dry, we would need to irrigate. So we're close enough to the greenhouse that we can run a water line to this site if we needed to irrigate if everything got too dry. Secondly, we have access to electricity. If obviously we have to worry about pests and critters that might get into our garden. So if we needed to hook up an electric fence to keep deer or any other larger pest out, we could do that here at this site too, because we're located closer to the greenhouse. You want to also consider the water drainage. So part of that comes back to the soil type that is located here. Certain soils will hold water, and certain soils will allow water to leach through. So there are 3 types of soil particles that are sand, silt, and clay. Soils that are heavy in clay will hold water, and soils that are more sand predominant will have water that will leach through it easier. A great soil to choose to plant in is a loamy soil. That's a good mixture of sand, silt, and clay, and it allows...
This site is a silty loam.
This site's a silty loam, which is a great soil site for our garden selection. Also, you want to consider slope. You don't want a site that is too steeply sloped that you're going to have to worry about water erosion when you till it up. And as you guys can see, this site is really pretty flat and has about a 2% slope that's on it. And then lastly, you want to consider your soil quality and soil type. So that's what Mr. Williams is doing. And so he's going to show you now how to use the soil probe and how to take that soil sample.
Okay guys, first thing I want to show you too is, as we indicated earlier in the classroom, we wanted to show you pretty much how that a garden is going to be laid out. If you kind of look up off here to the side, if Miss Wayne will go over, you'll notice we're going to start over here at this yellow stake where this flag is. That's going to indicate our first corner of our garden that we're going to have. Now, we'll have a fairly large garden, and so that's going to be where we're going to begin our garden site. Our second point, which we're going to look at, is we're going to come over here to this tree right here, and we're going to come away from that tree roughly about 10 feet. And the reason why that we want to come off about 10 feet is what Miss Wayne talked to you before, because of the shade. So when we come off the post that's down here, we want to come out roughly about where I'm standing here. And that's going to be our other part, so we don't get as much shade when we come and have some issues with sun later on in the summertime. About 6 feet off of the corner, if it's a large garden, I'm going to take the probe like this, come down straight into the soil, and we're going to go down until it hits the top of the probe, okay? So when we're looking at this probe, there's a couple of things, as Miss Wayne was talking about, we want to indicate to you. This thing right in here is it's dark brown. It stops about this particular point here, and this part right up in here indicates a topsoil, which is typically going to be the greatest amount of that silty loam that we were talking about. This bottom part is the clay, and that's the holding capacity in the water, and we typically want to have in a good spot around 6 minimum to about 9 inches. So when we look at this part right in here, roughly we're about 6-7 inches off, so we've got a good amount of topsoil to go ahead and have a good base for our garden. The other thing that we want to do is once that we have gone and we have gotten our soil out, is we want to go and place the soil that we've had here. We want to take this particular part and put it in that bag. Notice when we look at the bag, we use that soil that we've collected. Right now we have got the blue bucket out here with us, 5-gallon bucket. We'll take and mix all that soil in. We'll then place it in the bag that Miss Wayne showed you earlier today, and then we will put that and take in the bag and take it to the extension office. Find samples throughout the garden site, and then we're going to place this soil, all right, into the bucket.
While he's taking that out, some other good things to consider, like Mr. Williams said, you're going to take these samples from all over the garden, and you want those samples to be mixed together. So as you could see, as he was taking it out, he was busting those dirt clods up with his fingers so that that sample could be evenly mixed. One of the things that Extension also recommends is that you take those samples and let them air dry just a little bit. Don't put them wet into that bag. That just helps them get a good reading from that sample. So you can lay them out on some paper towels or some newspaper in the sun, and that way that they can dry out, and then after they've been mixed, they can be added back to that sampling bag.
Okay. The last thing is as Miss Wayne was talking about drying of the soil, I recommend, and what I do for my garden, and also what we do when we take soil samples out here at the school, is we go and we let it set and dry for a good 3 days. And typically by this time we can take it into inside dry climate controlled type setting. It lets that dry out. It also helps you go through and get it from those like this out. This is kind of sticky. It lets it dry out and lets you go and bust that up a little bit more.
Okay, so guys, that's our soil sampling video and site selection video. There's lots of other things that you guys can consider about site selection, but if you have any questions, comment on this post on Google Classroom. Don't comment on YouTube, we can't see who commented. And we'll get to those questions and we'll answer those. But again, we miss you guys deeply, and we'll see you again when we talk to you guys about fertilizers and amendments to the soil.